Satya Chakravarthy, Professor of Aerospace Engineering at the IIT Madras. Satya Chakravarthy has been the driving force behind some of the most fantastic innovations coming out of the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He is the founder of the world's largest combustion research and development NCCRT. Mentor to team Astral Hyperloop co-founder Astrovelos Energy, co-founder at Agnicol Cosmos and founder the Seaplane Company, an vertical takeoff and landing airplane. Professor Satyanarayan Chakravarthy, frugal areas of innovation, is working on solving Indian mobility problem, building electrical autonomous air taxis that will revolutionize India's transport industry. Today, he is going to present ubiquitous flying. How often people to travel. Sir, you can take it over, sir. You can present.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that introduction. Good afternoon to everybody who might be listening to this. The topic that I'm talking about is something that I have actually been propagating, so to speak, as an idea. The topic is called Ubiquitous Flying, with a byline that goes as how to get more people to fly more places and more often. Basically, what we are trying to say is that everybody should actually be flying instead of going by land, wherever they go, whatever distance they want to travel. And let us just see if that's going to happen or how that's possible, how we can make that affordable, and why we should do so, all of that stuff. So let's just start with this picture here. This is very easy to get. All you have to do is to Google for Bangalore traffic and hit, and you will get this picture. At least as of last year, this is the picture that you would get. You probably get a much worse picture, or maybe a better picture because of the pandemic. We don't know to thank the pandemic for this or not, but that's how it should be. So given this situation that we have in India, the question obviously is, shall we not explore the third dimension, right? So let's just think about that for a minute. Now, if you look at this picture, on the left-hand side, it actually shows the interior of an airport. And on the right-hand side, it actually is a picture that you would probably get to see if you peep out of the window of a palatial airport. Now, this is all looking very nice, except that it's typically usually outside the city. It's very large. It's for you to be able to actually drive on the road that is leading from the highway itself takes very long time. And then you have to get off there. You have to go through security checks. You have to go through ticketing or getting the boarding pass, and then walk very long distances through what looks like exotic shopping malls that nobody really shops from. And then, I mean, the whole thing is actually very, very complicated, right? So this is the situation that we have for flying for today. It is sort of made to look so good because it is actually not, right? It's made more complicated, so they try to make it look good. What we want to do is to redefine what is meant by scale, right? So we want to see how to scale up things, and to scale up things, it is not required for you to actually make large things. You don't need to have a large airport. You don't need to have a large plane. You don't need to have lot of things that are large. Instead, how about flipping it over and then say, is it possible for us to actually have large number of small things? So start with small things, but actually make them in large numbers and distribute them all over. And that's the kind of paradigm that I'm going to be talking about in the context of aviation here. So what is this talk all about, right? So technology drivers for the next generation aviation is what we are going to be talking about. Fundamentally, there are a couple of enablers over here, which is the leaner, meaner aircraft and engines enabled by 3D printing. So 3D printing, metal 3D printing and 3D printing in general is very important. And the next thing that's actually a disruptor is the electric aviation. So why is it a disruptor? Is primarily because, and I think I would pause here to actually point this out. It'll come back in a while, but it's very important to actually catch this early on in this talk on why electric aviation is a disruptor. So if you look at the trends in electric vehicles that is happening today, we are still having electric cars to be cheaper than the IC engine powered cars. And we want to also look at the range that you will get with a single charge when compared to what you will actually get with a single petrol tank being filled with petrol. And you will find typically that the ranges are actually getting there pretty good, but still a bit short, right? So you are probably somewhere like 70-80% or something, and the people say, okay, that is fine, that's fair, that's reasonable. In fact, if you now think about how the IC engine cars have performed, you probably don't need that range most of the time. It's just that you don't want to be filling petrol every day. And similarly, you don't want to be, charging your electric car every day. You might forget, you may have some problem, and so on. So you don't want to have this range anxiety. That's the issue that they have. We will show that when you now try to go electric, take a given plane and then try to electrify it in the sense, remove the gas, the fuel tank, remove the combustion engine, and put an equivalent weight of that with batteries and the motor and propeller and so on, you're not going to go too far. We will see this later on. So range is actually a huge problem with electric aviation. And that is because we can't just pack the aircraft with a lot of batteries, unlike in the IC engine car where you can actually pack a lot of the car with the battery. And the battery is actually having a very poor energy density when compared to fuel, and that's where the problem is. So since you can't pack a lot of the plane with the battery because the plane has to fly, if it can't get too heavy, what happens then is it becomes cheaper. So all of a sudden you have a situation where, because battery is actually the biggest cost driver in electric vehicles in general. So you have a situation now where electric planes will be cheaper than their combustion counterparts, which is not the case with electric cars as opposed to their combustion counterparts. So this is a disruptor, which essentially means that all of a sudden electric planes can become more affordable more quickly than electric cars are, right? That's something that a lot of people have not thought about as far as I can see, right? Now, the previous photograph that we actually showed is what I would actually call as, everybody calls it aviation, and that's because right now we have only one thing called aviation. So before we had the advent of mobile phones, we simply called the phones as phones, but now we are actually classifying them as landline phones. Similarly, when I'm now going to unleash for you a lot of other levels of aviation that are below this, all of a sudden we will now realize that the aviation that we are actually going through today, going to an airport, taking a taxi almost outside the city and all of that stuff, right? And going to another city outside that city and then taking a taxi from there to where you want to go, all that complication is what I would call as mega aviation. So instead, we should be actually talking about 3 levels below, and all 3 levels. And the first one that I would like to actually look at is what's called as regional aviation, which we will call as mini aviation. This is actually something that's been happening around in the country, and I will tell you why we are not really taking off with it as fast as we should. So this is one thing that's a lot of people are getting familiar. You are getting more and more airports that are getting opened up nearer where you are. So that's the mini aviation part. The second thing that I would like to do is to actually look at sub-regional aviation. So sub-regional aviation are essentially going from your city to your outskirts, or going from one taluk to another taluk, or let's say going from one town to another satellite town, right? That kind of stuff. So nearby towns is what I would actually call as sub-regional aviation. The third one is urban air mobility. So urban air mobility is what I would call as nano aviation. So if it's possible for me to actually go from here to the next locality in the city, so that I can actually go to a restaurant in the evening and then come back, like I take an Uber or an Ola, right? That's what I would call as urban aerial mobility. So what you will understand is that we will go up a full circle to mega aviation with this new tech. And that's the most interesting thing. And what that really means is we will progressively shrink the airports from those huge palatial mega mall kind of picture that we saw in the previous slide to something that is just like a box for you to just get out of your vehicle and get into the plane and just cut across through a quick security check, like what happens in a metro station or something like that. So we'll shrink the airports and then finally actually eventually make them obsolete, right? And that means like we will say that we don't need airports anymore, right? And so if we get there, we won't actually ask the question, so what are we doing about this? And then I will try to paint a roadmap of what we are doing over there. Let's start with where we want to start. As it is, if you look at the data as of last year or year before, right? So it is like not this year. This year is very special in maybe the history of mankind, if you will, with the COVID pandemic. And aviation has specifically taken a huge hit, right, because of this. And that's precisely because of the nature of aviation that we have today, which is the mega aviation. If you had the aviation that I am talking about, you will not have had this problem. All aerospace engineers will be busy having their jobs through this pandemic because they will be extremely helpful with the planes that they are going to be running, right? But if things were very normal, what you will actually find is India is a place with a huge amount of aviation growth. It's a very big market for aviation. It's actually the fastest growing market in the world the last several years consecutively. And so as it is, it's actually supposed to be a good story for India. Now, if you look at India's airports, you see this airport network. And what you will find is there are approximately about some 80 dots over there. Maybe if you have time, you can count and get back to me. I've not actually done the counting. But I think a couple of years, last year or so, I think the 100th airport was opened somewhere in Sikkim, if I remember right. So we have been progressing in terms of opening up airports. But look at the traffic density. The traffic density is still concentrated in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, Pune, Kolkata, Trivandrum, and so on. And it's all very sparse all over, all around the place. Whereas there are about 449 airstrips, airfields, and airports all around the country from the Second World War vintage that is actually up for grabs for planes to land and take off from, right? So is it possible for us to start utilizing that? And that is essentially the crux of the regional aviation idea that's been around for some time. So what are we exactly doing? We are trying to look at an analogy between transportation and communication. Now, when you had this fixed phone or the landline network, which is the black phone, I don't know how many people would have seen this kind of a phone in this generation, the millennials generation. I have actually grown up even without this phone. And then this phone happened in my life and then it phased out. So I've seen it all sort of so far. And that is now a museum piece, more or less. So the fixed phone network is akin to railways because you have to lay these lines and cables underground all the way up to the last mile for the phone. But of course, the railway stops at the railway station where the railway tracks are, and you have to actually find out your own way to get your home, and so on. Right? Take an auto rickshaw or whatever. On the other hand, aviation is more like the cell phone network. So you have these cell phone towers at these different places, and that's the only footprint that you have, more or less, and pretty much everything else is actually happening in the air. And that's exactly what happens with aviation. So if you have these small airports here and there, you don't need to be running railway lines kind of thing from one place to the other along the ground, similar to the fixed phone network on the railway. Instead, you can actually fly from the airport. So that means like your footprint is gone, you're up in the air, and then you're actually landing again in the next airport where you're again getting a footprint. Of course, the skies could get too crowded if you now try to push this. So if you have like point to point that you want to really go very fast, you can actually do bullet train, or more recently, Hyperloop is coming up as a even better option. And that's for another talk some other day on how Hyperloop could be much better than even bullet train. And that's kind of similar to a fiber optic link. And people do actually do fiber optic link rather than go wireless all the way around. And by the way, that's also kind of changing. Fiber optic links are now getting replaced by small satellites. So you have a constellation of satellites that can do the job. So everything is kind of like, again, the large scale essentially is a lot of small things put together, right? So when we're now talking about those 449 airports, just to zoom in, right? So Take Maharashtra, for example. Today, there are about 8 functioning airports in Maharashtra, a bit more maybe in the last couple of years. But there are about 23 airstrips that you could use. You can see clearly that it's mapping pretty much the entire map of Maharashtra. That means like pretty much everybody is somewhere close to, those circles are about 50-kilometer radius. Right? So you can see very little gaps in between. Most of the people are actually within those 50-kilometer radius. So that means like they're always within about 25 kilometers of an airport or the other if you can actually convert all of these things into airports. And this is exactly what the regional connectivity scheme tried to do. They came up with a lot more new airports and came up with new airlines and new services across these tier 2, tier 3 cities and all of that stuff. And they started off, but they're kind of stagnated. So we'll have to see why that is the case, right? Why they're not able to push. This is the mini aviation that I'm talking about, which is a regional aviation. And that's kind of like not going too far, right? So we need to think out of the box over here. So instead of the people going to the planes, like what we are doing today, how is it possible for us to actually bring the planes to the people, right? That's what we should be looking at. Now, one of the ways of actually doing that is to aggregate planes. Now, I don't know if you have noticed, if you are taking off from Chennai, of course, it looks like distant memory. I've not actually caught a flight in about 6 or 7 months now, as of today that I'm speaking, because of the pandemic. But when I used to be flying a lot, in Chennai, for example, there will be a bus that would crawl around the tarmac and then go to the other side. The time it takes for that to happen, you could actually go from Chennai to Bangalore itself, right? But along the way, you will see a lot of private jets that are parked, and they're just collecting dust. And these are all probably with some rich men. It's very similar to probably not women, unfortunately. So these are all very similar to the way Uber and Ola have been. That is, there are these assets that are around, right? And you could actually operate something called NSOPs, that is non-scheduled operations, where you have an app and then you just want to aggregate people who want to go from place A to place B and get them to go. Unfortunately, we have to actually go to the existing airports that are busy again, and there's air traffic congestion that would be there and all of that stuff. Unless we actually open up a lot of these very, very small airstrips and so on. So let's actually take again Karnataka as a case study that we had done, where you see in this picture right there that we are looking at the table, the bullseye is actually around Bangalore, and then you have a sub-regional circle over there that is marking the suburbs of Bangalore. And then you have a lot of these other circles that are centered around other hubs that are possible, right? Now, the reason why I actually picked up Maharashtra and Bangalore, Karnataka, is very important. All along the western coast of India, you have the Western Ghats, right? So if somebody wants to actually, let us say, go from Mangaluru to Bellary or Belagavi, right? So they have to actually cut across the Western Ghats and go. And if they go through the land route, they're actually going to take forever to get there. We will show some data about that. But if you want to now look at the regional aviation, is it now possible? I mean, if you pick Bangalore, for example, is it possible for me to actually go to Tumkur? Can I go to Kolar? Can I go to Hosur? Can I go to Mysore? Can I go to Hassan? Right? So some of the Shimoga, right? All these different places. Is it possible for me to actually Chittor, right? Vellore, right? All these places. Is it possible for me to actually go to all these sort of satellite townships, if you will, from Bangalore? You can say the same thing from Chennai or any other city you can name, like Chennai to Kanchipuram, Chengalpet, Tiruvallur, right? All these places we can think about, right? And if you pick Madras, you can go all the way to Kovilpatti and so on, right? Now this is exactly what I was talking about. You see that there are about 15 airstrips and helipads that are distributed all across. In fact, 21 helipads and 15 airstrips that are actually distributed all across Karnataka. And similarly, you can also have amphibious aircraft that can land on lakes, for example, and you can now make aerodromes. You don't need to necessarily have specialized airport anymore if you want to think about a lot of these. So around Chennai, in the Tiruvallur Kanchipuram district, you will find a lot of artificial lakes that have been there for thousands of years from the days of the Cholas, because this area is actually pretty arid and they had come up with an artificial irrigation system, and would it be possible for us to actually make use of those things, right? So this is what I was actually talking about. For somebody to go from, let us say, Mangaluru to Belagavi, or Bidar to Belagavi, or something like that. Some of these places are not even connected directly by land. You have to go to one place and switch trains from there. They will take like 36 hours and so on. What could be simply done in just about 1 or 2 hours if you were to fly across? So it just completely disrupts. Now, if you look at, so that is the distance matrix that we are talking about. And similarly, if you now look at a train matrix, you can look at the number of the hours that it takes, like 12 hours and so on. There are a lot of 18 hours, 23 hours, right? So you can see all these huge numbers. On the other hand, if you now look at this done by the same, actually less than an hour, or at the most an hour, and the cost by train is approximately of the order of about, I mean, let's say if you're looking at a three-tier AC or so, you will find that the cost is anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 rupees. That's the kind of tickets that we will actually want to sell for the planes that we are talking about, provided we are able to actually disrupt it with a low-cost plane and a low-cost operation, right? And the reason why the regional aviation is not taking off is simply because we just do not have the planes that will simply disrupt these kinds of markets. And that's what we want to do. So as we were talking about going to these interior towns, right? Not even tier 2, tier 3 cities. We are now getting down to towns. We talked about lakes that can be used, but I mean, it's possible that lakes are not exactly in the middle of the town, and you still have to actually go. Maybe the towns are not too big, so the lake would be like at the town would be at the bank of the lake. But let's suppose that there are no lakes, right? So and then you don't have runways. So there, a concept of circular runways comes up, which is simply like you have a playground and you can have a small building in the middle, and you can have a runway that's around it, and that becomes just an airport. In the case of places like Chennai, all your metro railway station tops are so long that you can actually have runways over them. So you can actually run planes from Saidapet to Chengalpet. You don't have to necessarily go to Meenapakam anymore, and so on, right? So that's exactly where we should not be searching where the light is and do what is doable. We have to actually see what needs to be done rather than what can be done, right? So it's very easy to jump into saying what can be done. So the biggest problem, this is the picture that we actually started with in the beginning. How do you suburban and intra-city to the city level? I talked about Saidapet to Chengalpet, but that's actually getting out of the city. But is it possible for me to actually even go from Saidapet to Adyar? If I were to actually take that one road, which is supposed to actually be like less than 3 kilometers, it may take about 40 minutes in traffic, right? So is it possible for me to actually make this in 3 minutes, which is what it's supposed to, as the crow flies, right? That level of disruption. So can I get down to beating this traffic completely? And that's where the urban traffic in Bangalore is so notorious. We picked up this particular picture. This kind of thing is happening in a few places. In Sao Paulo, there's a company called Boom that's running 300 plus helicopters. Just to contrast, there are not more than about 180 civilian helicopters in India. So it's just that one city alone has about 300 plus helicopters. That's a huge thing. Similarly, there is a company called Blade that is offering helicopter services in New York. But you look at the cost. If you want to go to the airport, it'll be about like $195, whereas a Uber cost will actually be about $50. So it's about 4 times almost, right? So is there a way by which we can disrupt that and get it down to almost like Uber? So if you now look at a Bangalore airport to the Electronic City, there is a helicopter service that is actually running. That particular bill that we are seeing here with a rupee value of about 2,519 is actually a Ola ride or Uber ride. I think it's probably Uber. I'm not trying to advertise any of those guys here, but the point essentially is, if you give me that money, I should be able to actually take you for this destination within 10 minutes, whereas it will take about 50 minutes or 1 hour 50. I'm sorry, no, it's 1 hour 51 minutes. You can see, right? So it's a huge time savings for so many people, so much billable hours. In fact, it is estimated that people are actually losing something like 3 to 4 years of their lives stuck in traffic. And this is outrageous, atrocious. We need to actually do something about it, right? So is there a way by which we can actually look at helipads in the city where we can take off and land and so on? So we actually started looking at maps across Bangalore and around Bangalore for us to actually go. And that dot out there, the pin drop there is actually the airport. Look at how far it is from the city center, and how much commute you could actually do within the city center within about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, what will actually take about 1 or 2 hours or even 3 hours sometimes in Bangalore on normal days. Right. So there are about like 150 helipads on rooftops of high-rise buildings, including hospitals. But this was actually meant for emergency evacuation. So they have not really got permissions from DGCA for the helicopters to use, because helicopters with single engine are the ones that might even come close to making commercial sense for these operations, and they cannot actually take off from elevated platforms and at night times and in drizzle. And so there are a lot of constraints that come up when you now have these helicopters. What about security check? A lot of these issues come up, right? So the basic problem that we have to ask is, if we are able to make planes that are cheaper to make and sell, and as well as to operate, right? So there is a capital cost involved, operational cost. The operational cost has fuel, pilot, and maintenance, right? Maintenance, and of course your operations, your staffing, and all of that stuff. So there are about 3 or 4 maintenance aspects, each of which is a big chunk, like about 25% to 30%. And if you're able to actually pull them down, right, you can have airlines that can be like mom and pop stores. Everybody will actually be wanting to run an airline similar to like a town bus, if you will, right? Now, the interesting thing is, the moment the regional aviation got opened up in about 2017, there were about 850 for the ATR 72 and the Bombardier Q400 variety. That's the smallest commercial aircraft that's available. And the current strength at that time was about 450. So if you now try to add those 850 to this 450, it's almost like tripling the fleet, right? Just in 1 year, so many orders. Of course, all of them did not accumulate in that same year. The orders went out for about those many. So that's actually the kind of demand you can clearly see. About 2,500 regional transport aircraft in about 10 years is what we want, right? So there is clearly a gap that these ATR 72 and Q400 are creating in the 60 to 79 seat segment, and there is absolutely nobody in the 80 to 100 segment. People actually then jump onto the jets, the regional jets, whereas the turboprops are actually more economical for these short distances that we're talking about for these regional aviation. And there is a need to fill this gap for making these new aircraft. And many of these aircrafts are actually previous century vintage. They have been designed 30, 40 years back or even before, right? And they have just been sort of cosmetically modified for modern purposes for all you can. So the basic problem that we have had is they are too expensive to acquire, expensive to operate, need extensive maintenance, they can operate only from well-qualified airfields. There's a high fuel consumption and emission levels, and these technologies are, as I said, about 3 to 4 decades old. So there is a need for a new regional transport aircraft, which is about 50% lower in acquisition cost, 25% lower in operating cost, 20% lower in fuel consumption, and 50% lower in maintenance cost, right? So if you are able to actually make these kinds of planes today, there is a huge market that's just waiting to be unraveled, and people should be listening to this. And these are typical specs that you can think about for about a 90-passenger aircraft with about 2,000 kilometers, with a max for 70 passengers, let's say the max fuel about 3,000 kilometers, let's say, and so on. So these are specs that we can think about. Not very, ceiling is about 30,000 feet, cruise speed is about 550 kilometers. So you can try to make it like a what should I say, a frugal aircraft, not necessarily one of the top of like the aircraft at all, right? Similarly, gas turbines. So we have been working at the National Combustion Center for Combustion R&D, where we are trying to disrupt gas turbine engines by 3D printing, all the way up to doing the combustors. If I have the combustors 3D printed and they can withstand high temperatures over continuous periods without getting distorted, you should be able to actually make a lot of other parts 3D printed. And 3D printed simply slashes the, because these are high-tech equipment with a lot of precision machining that is required, precision assembly that's required. So if it's possible for us to cut down the amount of metal being used in terms of raw material, because it's additive manufacturing, and you cut down the number of, and so you cut down the requirement for precision assembly, and you also cut down the requirement for precision machining. All of these things, the manufacturing costs will simply come down drastically when you try to use 3D printed parts for gas turbine engines, and that's one way by which we could disrupt it. Helicopters is what we've actually been seeing, and these are fundamentally complicated machines, and they are supposed to be like hovering machines. You have like one big rotor at the top that is actually trying to hold it up in the air, and then you now try to move slowly by tilting it forward with a small component forward and go forward, right? So that's a very complicated, and then of course you have to worry about tip speeds, tip Mach numbers, transonic buffeting, all of that stuff, right? And then the mechanical swash plates and all that stuff. It's a mechanical engineer's delight, but an aerospace engineer's yuck, because we always want to have as many as less moving parts as possible, and we want to shape things and get the airflow to go around these shapes or go through these shapes like airfoils and nozzles to get our job done, or fan blades to get our job done, rather than brute force try to get things done, right? So that's exactly where the new age eVTOL is coming up. E for electric, VTOL for vertical takeoff and landing. There are lots of such implementations that are being developed in the last several years. Uber has put out a white paper called the Uber Elevate, and they're working on this program aggressively, trying to partner with a lot of these players. There is Lilium, there is eHang, Zunum Air, Volocopter, and so on, right? Now, what's so special about these planes, right? So the electric planes can now be cheaper. I think I gave a primer for this right at the beginning. So electric planes can actually get cheaper than helicopters because the number of parts, the complexity of operation is cheaper, right? And could push more E-planes into the market than helicopters, because they are fundamentally, you can view them as like cars with wings and rotors. There is also one more fantastic advantage with electric propulsion, which is all you have to do is to simply run wires to different motors. You don't have to actually transmit the shaft power through shafts and so on. It's on mechanical transmission, it's electric transmission. So what it essentially means is that you can now distribute the propulsion. Instead of having like one large propeller, you can have like a lot of small propellers. And what the distributed electric propulsion concept tries to achieve through a lot of work funded by NASA is to arrange these small propellers in front of the wings, so that the air that is blown along the wing span over the wing can actually enhance the lift that's being produced by these wings. So this is all of a sudden a aero propulsion integrated architecture. So this technology is like an emerging technology. So this suddenly enhances the lift that's produced. So you can you don't need to go very fast in the first place, or you can have compact wings. A lot of advantages are there, right? Fundamentally, electric motors are scale-free, so you get like extremely good efficiencies that are possible at different speeds at which this can operate. Now, what can E-planes do? That's a question that we also actually looked at, because we can't pack too much battery into the plane, otherwise the plane will get too heavy. So E-planes actually cannot do a lot. That's essentially currently the situation. It may travel at about 150 to 200 kilometers per hour. I think Lilium or Joby Aviation does about 300 kilometers per hour, because they want to actually generate a lot of lift with the wings that they have, where they're trying to make the wing compact for urban aerial mobility and so on. And we can get endurances of the order between about 15 minutes to 1 hour. That's about it, right? But when compared to these, the combustion planes are actually a huge overkill, right? And we don't even know whether that's required, but this doesn't look like it'll match up to anywhere there. So what do we do with it is what we have to ask, right? So we are actually some reserve battery for redundancy, limited by battery pack, and that can be fit with an available real estate or weight. And there's also a charging time that's a limitation that's posed, or we have to worry about how we can reliably do battery swapping without any loose contacts in midair subsequently. So the ranges are of the order of about 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 300, right? It is about, whereas a four-seater Cessna with a IC engine, single nose propeller can actually go 1600 kilometers. It's about more than 4 times the Lilium can do, right? Uh, Now, there is a lot of possibility for control with all these different motors and so on, but that's for future. So what we did was we actually did a try to understand this whole thing. So for economic purposes, what you will find is as the number of passengers increases in the aircraft, you will definitely want to have higher range. But when you now go to the lower number of passengers, you see like a huge cloud of data over there, whereas there is a wide range of range that you can see anywhere between not exactly zero, but close to these are all like IC engine aircraft, by the way, existing aircraft. They're not the electric variety at all, right? So you're actually seeing ranges that are anywhere between, let's say, kilometers all the way to about 2,000, 3,000 kilometers. So like about 10 times more in the lower end. So there is a lot of intra-city variety that is possible, regional variety that is possible, and then finally the long distance that we are not more familiar with, right? So in the case of combustion aircraft, the problem essentially is even the smallest aircraft actually has a large range. And that's where our mind is warped, thinking that we always need a very large range, which may not exactly be the case. If you now look at what you can do with existing aircraft and then simply electrify it, right? So there is a formula that you can derive, and I can boast about an electric aircraft propulsion course that I have actually offered. I think I will also try to put it in YouTube. It's been video recorded for the first time, where we actually derive these the range formula and all of those things. You can clearly see E star is the energy density. So the better the battery, the greater the range you will get. You need to have better efficiencies, which means you want to be more aerodynamic, you want to be lightweighted, and so on. Right? A lot of these different factors are coming up over there for the range. So applying this to existing aircraft by removing the fuel tank and the engine, if you now try to find out, taking a certain approach to what will be the trends in battery energy density growths, you see that right now we're not anywhere more than about 300 kilometers with existing aircraft for, let's say, a Cessna or a Pilatus or an Embraer and so on. Airbus is probably about 450 kilometers. But if you actually look at the combustion aircraft range, it'll be huge when compared to 450 kilometers. And even if you now wait for another 10 years through about 2029, 2030, you will find that the ranges are not actually going anywhere past about 400 kilometers or 600 kilometers, right? So this is actually the fundamental problem that we are facing with electric aircraft as far as the range is concerned, right? So you could use things like range extenders, if you will, where you can now use a small power plant that can connect with the battery and then work together with the battery and so on. And you can get into the concept of a hybrid electric aircraft. There are a few people who are actually trying to do this. A lot of people that we showed as the eVTOL guys are actually trying to enter a market of urban aerial mobility in order to say that it's okay not to have that range. But if you want to have the range, today the answer is hybrid electric aircraft to some extent, and we will see some numbers there. So we did some analysis of series hybrid aircraft as where the engine could be used as range extender. The reason why this is actually a very nice concept is because, first of all, I will still have a electric aircraft front end, so I can still run wires to these different motors instead of actually having a parallel shaft connection from the engine to the batteries in a parallel connection. So series is good in that sense. But of course, you can also have an electric parallel version where you can run wires. That's one thing. The second thing is I can actually afford to progressively shrink the engine as my battery technology grows, right? So the same aircraft architecture can remain, but its range can be extended progressively. So this is a very nice idea that we could think about. And lo and behold, we can actually see that the ranges can actually increase significantly for, let's say, the 4 aircraft that we took. When you now try to increase the degree of hybridization. So when you say degree of hybridization, that means like a 0.5, 0.6 kind of a degree of hybridization essentially means that you're having a fairly larger engine and a smaller battery pack, as opposed to if you had a 0% degree of hybridization is a full electric, whose range that we saw in the couple of slides back, right? So the moment you actually try to hybridize more and more, and spend more time over the next 10 years waiting for the batteries to improve, you can see that the ranges take off, but still not getting anywhere close to the current ranges at all. That's the current situation that we have. So what we do is a two-seater eVTOL instead of actually a four-seater or a five-seater or a conventional aircraft, and we promise to have a 200 200 kilometer per hour kind of speeds aircraft, which will be meant for urban aerial mobility, right? And this is the starting point that we would like to do, and progressively, as either the batteries become bigger or we can go hybrid, we can make planes that are these are actually eVTOLs because we want to take off and land in cities in congested spaces and so on. In fact, our wingspan that we're targeting is fairly compact at around about 4 meters. Whereas if you want to have a regional aircraft or a sub-regional aircraft that we were talking about, let's say up to about a 19-seater, we'll probably VTOL is like not a good option. You want to probably take off from runways which are like circular runways, as we talked about in parks, or metro top station tops, or lakes. Any of those kinds of amphibious aircraft varieties. All of those things are possible. So the next big idea here is what I would call as the inverse form. So when I now try to think about an inverse form, essentially what I do is, let's say I actually have an aircraft that is fully electric, and I don't have a range extender. That means I'm not touching combustion at all, right? And I am taking off from my doorstep vertically, but I want to go from, let's say, Chennai to Bangalore. And my aircraft can go only 200 kilometers, which means that it will probably not cross, not even Vellore, right? So it won't go anywhere even let's say it will go to Vellore, let's say, right? But I can't go to Bangalore. So what I would actually suggest is, in the future, you could have one combustion aircraft that takes off from Meenambakkam maybe, and nobody goes to Meenambakkam. They are actually taking off from VTOLs, on VTOLs from their doorsteps. But it's all scheduled in such a way that all of them go towards the Bangalore direction in the city suburbs, and sort of rendezvous with the aircraft that is taking off from Meenambakkam at around that time, and start getting a mid-air recharging. And then this technology is now just picking up, where you can have a powerless, wireless charging, right? Wireless power charging. So you try to do that, and then you can keep on getting power that is generated in the big aircraft and keep going to Bangalore. When you're somewhere in the vicinity of Bangalore, you now try to split apart and go to your respective places, and then land vertically. So this essentially means that nobody goes to any airport anymore for takeoff or landing, and we just simply make airports obsolete. This is the way we would try to disrupt the aviation scene with electric aircraft, right? So what all we talked about today is, on the one hand, we have the conventional propelled aircraft, and on the other hand, we have the electric aircraft. So we could actually make 3D printed gas turbines in India, which will disrupt the gas turbine engine costs, which are actually about half the cost of an aircraft itself. And we need to start making these regional aircraft in India as well, and get them propelled by 3D printed gas turbine engines made in India, so that they can feed into the regional aviation market. On the other hand, if you now look at the electric aircraft, you can have a fully electric aircraft or a hybrid aircraft. Fully electric aircraft are also getting to the kind of ranges that are required for regional aviation as the batteries are improving. There is a lot of new chemistry that is coming up that is not lithium ion anymore. People are thinking about lithium oxide, lithium sulfur, sodium-based batteries, or metal air batteries, which is like zinc air or aluminum air or lithium air. So a lot of these different batteries have way more specific energies when compared to lithium polymer or lithium ion. The lithium ion and lithium polymer were primarily perfected for commercialization from a pocket electronics point of view. When the Walkman, the transistor radio, all of that stuff came, and then progressed into like a CD Walkman, and then iPods, and then mobile phones, smartphones, laptops, iPads, right, or tablets. Those are the ones that actually lithium ion is pretty good. But we have been trying to do a brute force technology fit with lithium ion into electric cars and so on, and then thinking about them for the planes as well. That's a problem. So if you now try to look for new battery technology, you will be able to actually even get the fully electric to do the regional aviation, right? But definitely we can do with hybrid, and we can do the fully electric for the intercity and the suburban commute. And all of this, regardless of whichever way it is, can be run as NSOPs, non-scheduled operations, as an aggregation, which means that you have an app and people just sign up to fly at a particular time and show up at a particular place. Not very different from an Uber or an Ola. Maybe go a little bit farther from where you normally would get picked up by a car to start with, but eventually it could be as close to your doorstep as what your current Uber Ola do within the next 5 to 10 years, right? That's the kind of outlook. Now, this is not just a talk; it's actually a to-do list, and what are we doing about it, right? So the one thing that I talked about is the 3D printed engines and so on. So I'm actually working as part of a fairly large consortium of different stakeholders that is trying to kickstart a manufacturing base over here for 3D printed gas turbine engines. That's actually a big thing to start with, and of course that can spawn an aircraft manufacturing as well. And of course, the other thing that I do is to have a startup company that I have co-founded called the E-Plane Company. Let's just quickly look at what the E-Plane Company does. And we talked about the two-seater sometime back. We called the E200, but what we did sometime last year was a proof of concept with a 6 kg payload capability, which has a VTOL as well as fixed-wing hybrid aircraft. And what we are currently doing is to develop a 50 kg payload capacity of the same kind, which can take cargo and fly autonomously. And sometime next year is when we would expect to try to put out the next year or early year after next is when we would probably try to, that's 2022, early 2022, is when we would try to do the 200 kg variety that can go all the way to taking about 2 people. Initially, maybe human piloted, which means it's only 1 paid passenger. But since we are actually doing this out of India and so on, there are a lot of reasons to believe that it would still make economic sense. A lot of Uber rides are actually single passenger rides. So very similarly, we will be able to make that happen. And the second thing, of course, is we can eventually go fully autonomous when certification permits. And then it will simply disrupt aviation because it gets rid of the pilot cost, the fuel cost, and the maintenance cost. And the capital cost is also fairly low, as we talked about, for electric aircraft when compared to the combustion aircraft. So that's essentially a short video of the proof of concept plane that we have. It's just taking off, and just wait until it just goes a little bit forward. Of course, in the video itself, it's going to come back and land, but I think I'll stop, not really play the video completely before. Right, so there it is. So let's move on, and thank you very much for listening.
Sir,
Yes,
few questions are raised by the students, sir.
very good.
So at first, Kartikeya is asking, sir, we have been thinking about jetpack since long. Is it time it becomes reality from science fiction now? He's also mentioning, he's talking about the commercial use.
So what we find is that having combustion work for a single individual and taking off vertically might be more expensive. Is my current sense. So it's all about techno-economic viability. So you have to do a calculation. You have to say, if I'm going, now it's possible that, for example, let us say I want to go from here to a shop that is nearby, and I'm not going to spend a lot of fuel on that, and it's okay, right? So how much am I willing to pay for that is what we have to sit and work out. That is number one. Second is safety, right? So as you now get down to being so personal with flying, everybody tries to fly by themselves. That becomes a little bit dangerous. If you now try to get this to become autonomous in some ways, and you keep your hands tied up and you don't mess up with the flight, it might actually work out. As far as the technology is concerned, I think the key thing that we have to work out is the cost, which I have not done. So for every technology, there is a certain scale at which we need to pitch it. And I don't know what exactly is that scale in terms of distance to be covered for a jetpack.
So, sir, the second question is asked by Shrikant Jandra. Sir,
Mhm.
I want to know whether the disadvantage of weight will be more when we move to the hybrid vehicles.
No, actually, what we did in our analysis was to keep the weight constant, right? So it's possible for us to configure an aircraft. Let's say, for example, I took a Cessna, and you have a certain fuel tank weight and you have an engine weight that is currently there. Now remove that, and you want to now put some batteries. If you try to put some batteries and also an engine, obviously you don't have to put the original engine. That means it's going to increase the weight because the original engine was anyway having that weight, and you now have the batteries as well. Obviously, you need to put a smaller engine that will keep on charging the plane, the battery as the plane flies, so that you can get a range extension happen, right? So this essentially means that you can keep the weight constant and cut short the range. The other possibility is if you now allow for the weight to increase, then your wings have to become larger, or you have to go at a higher speed. That means you're guzzling more power. So that balance gets upset if you try to change the weight, but that's also possible. People have actually shown that also can be done. Right? Any more questions?
Sir, another question, sir. Sanjit Tayade. He's asking, sir, can we use salt-based battery?
What base battery? Sorry.
Salt.
Sodium batteries are being worked on very aggressively. I'm not familiar with salt-based batteries to comment very competently about it. Any more questions?
Yes, sir. There was another question from Ganesh. Should current designs to try to develop an upgrade to existing aircrafts, like upgrading fuel-powered aircrafts to hybrid aircraft? This is suitable, he is asking.
I think that trend is going to happen now because electric aircraft actually are disrupting the space. There are a few people who are already designing hybrid aircraft for urban aerial mobility, like Bell Helicopter, Rolls-Royce, Siemens, and Airbus consortium, and so on. That is primarily to address the range anxiety, if you will. But the disruption actually happens with full electric, which becomes extremely a simple architecture. And it does compel you to improve your aerodynamics and lightweighting of the structures and so on, so that every ounce of room you can get out of electric aircraft, you will try to do it modernizing your design as opposed to sticking to older designs that are about 3-4 decades old. And while there, what you will also find is, as I said, new battery chemistries are emerging. If you just want to stick to lithium-based batteries, it could be lithium air or lithium sulfur batteries. But there are also sodium-based batteries and other metal air batteries like zinc air or aluminum air that are coming up, which have much higher energy densities. And once those happen, and these things can be expected to happen in the next 2 to 3. And when that happens, you will find that most of the current aircraft will get completely replaced by electric aircraft over the next 10 years. This change is just about to happen. We are at the turning point of aviation in some sense.
The presentation was so good.
Sorry,
Yes.
one at a time.
Sir, another question, sir. Is there any current research going on for scramjet, or is there a good scope for it?
Yeah, indeed. I think there is a lot of work that's already happened on scramjets since the time of Ronald Reagan, when they were talking about the Orient Express that would take them from New York to Tokyo in 4 hours and so on. A lot of work on supersonic combustion has happened, long duration materials withstanding capability, 3D printing again coming up, where, for example, the Agnikul rocket itself actually has a 3D printed inconel material that can withstand temperatures continuously, reaching steady states for over several minutes. The moment you actually reach steady state with these combustion processes, it can be extended to, let's say, about a few hours, which means that you can go from Chennai to San Francisco in 3 to 4 hours. I think if we are able to spend some money on doing this, maybe under about even 100 crores, it should be possible to configure something and go forward in the next 10 years. Yes, it is. To me, it seems like it is within reach, within line of sight of being able to do achieve.
Sir, and another question from Khabib Zaman. How would
Mhm.
the trade-off go if we add solar electric propulsion to the hybrid electric aircraft?
Right. So right now, the problem essentially with solar is the solar panels are actually extremely inefficient, and the batteries are basically storage devices. You can try to get rid of a lot of battery and have only a buffer pack, but of course, you need to make sure that you have enough sun all the time, and so on. Otherwise, the buffer battery pack will have to back up. All these things are fairly poor devices. PV cells are poorly efficient. The battery packs have very low energy density. So these are the ones that essentially what makes for a very large wingspan for such an aircraft. It becomes extremely unwieldy. So it's nice. It's nice for like an exhibit piece. You can do like around the world in solar and all of that stuff. One or two guys can do, but it's not meant for like daily commute from Saidapet to Chengalpet or something like that. But that said, you can actually look at new kinds of applications for these. Like for example, you can think about these as what is called as stratospheric platforms. That means today, for example, we're using GPS in our mobiles all the time for locating ourselves and for giving our location to somebody else, and for getting your food order done or whatever it is. And similarly, the GPS is used for navigation across the city and so on. Now, this is basically being done by a spacecraft that is 36,000 kilometers away, and then looking exactly minutely at where you are and doing this for everybody all around the world, right? Or a huge piece of land that it can see. Instead, again, I talked about large number of small things. Is it possible for us to actually sort of break that up and then say, hey, you want to actually be located in your locality, in your city? Why do you have to actually have a spacecraft that is looking at a large area and then trying to minutely pinpoint where you are from 36,000 kilometers? Instead, you should have these stratospheric platforms that are solar powered with very large wings, which are sort of hovering and moving around in circles, adjusting for that movement just over a city, right, or even a locality, right? And then you can have now camera-based or visual or optical ways of locating people instead of more complicated ways of doing it. Of course, that could be cloud covered, so you may need radar imaging to do this and stuff. But a lot of compact radars have come up today. So the technology on the sensors is disrupted. Correspondingly, we could use solar-powered aircraft, more like winged drones that can hover around and do what I would call as a LPS, which is a local positioning system instead of a global positioning system. So there is a different application for it. The reason why I'm saying so much about all these things is it's one thing to say, yes, the technology is there and it is possible to do, or the technology is not commercially viable. No, as an engineer, we have to actually find what is the application for which a certain technology is commercially viable and then go pursue that application. If you're not worried about the application that is economically viable, you're not a good engineer. right? So it's important to understand where it will be useful, and I think there is some use case for that if somebody wants to pursue.
Sir, another question from Manoranjini. Uh, it is possible for e-votal to overcome the gust loads or any other external force if e-votal becomes like Uber or Ola taxi.
Right. So eVTOLs actually have the capability to have their engines revving up, their vertical rotors revving up anytime it is beginning to fall down or something, right? And they can also try to balance whenever you have gusts that are trying to topple it and so on. So, for example, the one that we are making at E-plane has this redundancy feature that the vertical rotors will not tilt. All the vertical rotors will not tilt forward or shut down. You will actually get them to operate so that some amount of control is continuing to happen. We are spending some power, but we are also getting something out of it in terms of extra lift that the fixed wing will generate due to the flow field of these vertical rotors. So you need to do this in a very tricky way and get this vertical rotors to support you in giving that extra control that's required to withstand gusts, so that you can be up there rock solid. And it will also be redundant in the sense that if something goes wrong with the wing, you will still have these vertical rotors, or if something goes wrong with the vertical rotor, you will still have the wings. So all these different options exist for us with these hybrid eVTOLs, so that you will have redundancy as well as safety against gusts. Yes, the answer to that question is a big yes. That's possible.
Sir, another question from Sanchit Tayed. Sir, can we use rolling cylinders instead of big wings? And can't we use a carbon nanotube for body?
Okay, there are two questions there. The rolling wings, yes, the quick answer is yes. Now look at why we need to do that or what will happen. So if I were to actually use rolling wings, I might as well use rotating rotors like a quadcopter, like let's say a E-hang or a volocopter has like lots of these small rotors that are distributed along a circular frame and so on. So the problem with these things that continuously have to rotate, either rolling wings or these rotary wings, is we are continuously supplying power at almost like full level, right? Because you are trying to hover there, or you're trying to actually keep yourself up in the air. That will guzzle a lot of power, and that's not going to take you too far, right? And that means like you'll have to swap batteries very often, whatever it is. So to me, it seems like a fixed wing is pretty good for long distance flights, and you just need to operate these vertical rotors primarily for takeoff and landing. Besides, of course, as I said, for redundancy and extra control during forward flight. That's about it. Otherwise, if you keep these rolling wings, I think it's just going to guzzle more power. I think more important stress that I'm giving is not for any new technology for new technology's sake, right? The sun is actually the oldest energy producer for this world in the solar system, and that technology still works extremely well, right? It's the cheapest technology. We get energy for free from the sun. So you have to understand, you just can't get intoxicated by any new tech that you see, unless you see it makes sense from a commercial point of view, right? The moment somebody asks you the question, who is going to pay for it, right? And if you have an answer, then that new tech is worth talking about. Otherwise, it's not worth talking about. I forgot the second question. I think the
So can't we use carbon nanotube for body?
Again, it's a question of cost. So composites are now becoming carbon composites are actually becoming extremely commonplace today. And unless I really need that kind of strength that carbon nanotubes might give if they are laid up in a particular way and so on, I don't see what's so great about it. For the kind of aircraft that I am talking about, right? It may be useful for some high strength, high temperature withstanding capability somewhere in exotic conditions. But question is there somebody who's going to pay for it, right? If somebody is going to pay for going from Chennai to San Francisco in 3 hours, and we can put carbon nanotubes over there and so on, no problem, right? Just don't do things just for the sake of doing that. It's actually a completely wrong idea. Yeah.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for your detailed explanation. Thanks for spending your valuable time over here, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for listening and for all the questions that you asked. And I hope the talk was useful and my answers were reasonable. Thank you very much once again.
Thanks, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We can end the session, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.